The 60s and the 50s and the 60s, it was da, 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 da. It was hanging hallways, singing, harmonizing, drinking wine and beer. That was it. No drugs.
Right. It was close quarters, man.
Right.
So you had to switch up once in a while, you know.
They was sending everybody eviction notices and stuff, you know. They was trying to claim the place a long time ago. They asked about the 14th eviction notice in my house, you know. My mother said, let's go. Well, you know, she didn't like it anyway. She wanted to get out. She's an old Italian lady. And I broke some windows anyway, and they got thrown out. But I didn't go. I didn't leave. I just stayed down there, you know. So I ended up living, I was about 14 years old. I ended up living with his family, Tony's family, which is my family. And you know, just like one of the kids, you know, just in there, you know, better watch the shit, George, you know, clean your feet, do this, do that, you know, and it's my mother. His mother is my mother, you know.
My mother, his mother was my mother. His mother was my mother. My mother was theirs. Close, very close place. You go down there now, man, and you see there is nobody living in there. That's what's changed. They boarded the whole damn thing up.
Columbia Point Housing Project in the summer of 1981. Once an integrated project of mostly working families, today the population is the non-white poor, people without jobs.
Buildings they've been pillaged, they've been looted, firebombed, they just lay there. Well, Columbia Point is at least 80% locked up. I would say 8 out of 10 apartments in Columbia Point aren't being used today.
Less than a mile away across the bay, South Boston residents look at the point from the city's well-maintained waterfront parks. It's easy to point the finger at an all-black project from a white beach. Columbia Point has become Boston's favorite example of government failure.
An element was allowed to enter the Columbia Point project, and they drove the nice people out. And they just left and said, we can't put up with this because they were mugged, and they were knocked down, and they were assaulted, and they were robbed. And when that happened, they left.
But South Boston has its own public shame, the D Street project. Once integrated, now all white, 25% vacant. During the day, children play in gutted buildings, and at night, residents are afraid to walk outside. Both of these projects have been managed until 1980 by the Boston Housing Authority, a part of the political organization of the mayor of Boston. Today, these projects and the Boston Housing Authority are run by the courts as a result of a suit filed by tenants and liberal lawyers. Now, Judge Paul Garrity and his receiver Harry Spence are trying to save Boston's public housing stock for the poor. Housing here is tight. Most new housing is luxury housing. Here, 1 out of 10 Boston residents lives in a housing project. Here, 1 out of 5 who rent public housing. There is as much public housing per person in Boston as anywhere in America. And as elsewhere in America, in Boston, public housing is part of the landscape.
Housing projects, no matter where you go, you're taking large masses of people, putting them together in a very small area, and most of them are strangers. You breed a lot of distrust, discontent, crime, especially violent crime.
In other parts of the country, projects that once won architectural awards have been allowed to run down. They've been abandoned and finally have been demolished. Pruitt-Igoe, D Street, Columbia Point. In the minds of most Americans, they are typical public housing. On the same small peninsula as Columbia Point is the Kennedy Library. Like John Kennedy, many Americans wanted to help the poor with government spending. To the coalition that originally sought public housing, labor, veterans, minorities, intellectuals, projects like Columbia Point have become an embarrassment. This library is a carefully designed piece of architecture. Out of the windows, its visitors look at Kennedy's sailboat and the sea beyond. But no public windows face Columbia Point.
They set up a system that can be destructed and let it destroy itself. And at that point, as it gets more destructive and more, it's like an old thing. What are you going to do with an old car? You put it in a junkyard when it's through.
But there's something wrong here. In the memories of many of the past residents of public housing is a different picture of the communities their projects used to be. And some people still live in projects that work, that have escaped the public eye. Mary Ellen McCormick one of the oldest projects, demonstrates the possibilities of public housing. Less than a mile from Columbia Point and D Street, this project stands as a testimony to the public housing program and to the notion that government can run housing or anything else when it wants to. All but a few Americans either have forgotten or never knew that most projects started off this way, and thousands of decent units survive today. For some reason, these projects do not come to mind, only the others, that working families left to the welfare poor, be they black or white, where cities have given up maintenance, where people live in fear. It is the D Streets, the Columbia Points, that have come to stand for public housing that people now resent. Americans have forgotten why the projects were built and how we, on the free market, had built housing before government stepped in.